This is a story that I have only told a handful of times. This happened around 2009. I used to live with my dad, my two brothers and my grandma in her house. I don't mean to sound cliché, but this house was infamous in our family for paranormal activity in the past. I used to share a room with my dad, mainly because I was terrified of sleeping in a room by myself, even as a teenager. The night of the occurrence, the room we stayed in was in the basement. It was refurbished and nice, but was still straight up horror movie material. The three of us fell asleep around 1 a.m. after watching a movie. I was on the couch parallel to the bed where my dad and Pam, his girlfriend, were sleeping, no more than 5 feet away. I was in a great deep sleep. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, my eyes snapped open, and I was wide awake. I wasn't groggy or anything like that. It was like I hadn't even been asleep 2 seconds ago. It was so strange. I was just laying there, on my back, looking around the room. My eyes were adjusting to the dark, but I could only see silhouettes of things in the room. TV, dresser, etc. It was pitch black in the basement at night. I wasn't scared, just confused on how and why I just snapped awake like that. About 5 minutes pass, and just as I'm about to fall back into sleep, I hear my dad's voice to my left. "Tyler, what are you doing?" I was caught off guard because I didn't expect him to be awake either. I turned my head to see his silhouette, still laying in bed. I was confused as to why he asked me what I was doing when I was just laying down. I said, "What do you mean?" "I'm laying here." He didn't answer me. I was thinking he was just talking in his sleep like he usually did. I fell back asleep almost immediately. The next morning I wake up and walk into the living room. My dad was sitting at the table smoking a cigarette. I'll never forget, he had all the curtains pulled open, the radio on, and it was a beautiful sunny day outside. I walked over and sat down with him. We started talking about random shit. Then I remembered what happened the night before. I asked him, "Why did you ask me what I was doing last night?" I had a smile on my face thinking he was gonna say he didn't remember because he was sleep talking. But he had this real serious look come across his face. He said, "I don't even think I should tell you." I instantly felt fear wash over me. I didn't want him to tell me, but I had to know. The curiosity was killing me. Just typing this out is giving me fucking goosebumps all over again. This is what he told me word for word. "Last night when you were asleep I woke up out of the blue. I was laying there for a while before I happened to look over at you. And I seen you squatting on the arm of the couch, kind of like a gargoyle statue. That's when I asked what you were doing. But when you answered me, your voice came from the opposite end of the couch. That's when my eyes focused in and I seen you laying there. Tyler, something was watching you. I didn't want to scare you, so I didn't say anything. I just laid there and watched it. It never moved or turned its head. I couldn't make out any features or anything like that. It eventually just faded into the black of the room. That story has haunted me ever since. The scariest part of it all is that it wanted us to see it. It woke me and my dad up at the same time, but I never saw it. And I'm so glad I didn't. If I had just looked down towards my feet, there is no telling what I would have seen or what would have happened. I'm from the US and Hobbs is in the military in UK. And this all started when I was first joining him after we got married. We were allocated a house in Scotland. Firstly, wasn't a great start. I then moved in. From the get-go, I hated the feeling in the house. It just felt eerie to me. I felt like I was constantly looking over my shoulder like someone was watching me. Just got creepy vibes constantly. Then started noticing weird things. Like the spare bedroom door would not stay shut. I would shut it, where the door latch would be secure, go in my bedroom and come out, and it would be open again. I seriously hated that room. I never went in there. Always felt cold and off-putting to me. Then random stuff would happen, like I'd go downstairs in the middle of the night to find the door to our backyard be wide open. I'm a warrior, never go to bed without locking and rechecking all doors. Random stuff like that. Then the sounds started. All the time I would hear someone going up and down the stairs. My husband acknowledged these noises too. I seriously hated being in this house alone. I would cry if my husband had to go away for work and I had to be home alone. Absolutely awful. Anyways, my best friend decided to come visit from California for 2 weeks. I joked around with her about how she got to stay in the haunted room, and she literally told me to F off. Didn't believe or care about crap like that. The following morning, after her first night there, she said something about me coming into the room that night. I was baffled, as I didn't. And she proceeded to tell me that she woke up with the feeling of her upper body being pinned down and her legs not. She said she thought I came in and asked her if she was okay, but she couldn't speak back. This totally could have been sleep paralysis. But whatever it was, it freaked her out enough to the point where she wouldn't stay in that room for the remainder of her trip. Fast forward to the end of her trip. It was the day before she was getting ready to fly home. Just so happened that my husband was leaving on a work trip the same day. He comes in from work all excited to tell me something. Turns out that he was speaking with someone from work. These were all military quarters, military-only neighborhoods. And he had mentioned that I thought our house was haunted. The guy proceeded to tell my husband he had a friend that lived in a house on our street who thought their house was haunted. The family ended up picking up and moving abruptly after a final straw. When the mom walked up and heard her daughter talking to someone. When asked who, the daughter replied, "The man at the end of my bed." The guy said the military allowed them to switch houses, as long as they signed something stating they wouldn't disclose their address to anyone, because they didn't want the house to sit empty. Needless to say, I was so excited the day we got to move. Never since have I felt anything like that, or scared to stay on my own. My wife and I lived for nearly 5 years on the island of Okinawa, which anyone who's ever lived there will tell you has a well-deserved reputation for being very haunted. Some of the atrocities that took place there during World War II were absolutely horrifying. Combine that with a native culture that has a strong belief in ancestor worship, and it's apparently an ideal recipe for the presence of lots and lots of restless spirits. Every year Okinawa celebrates the festival of Obin, with customs and traditions that are quite different from those on mainland Japan. The purpose of Obin is to commemorate one's ancestors, and the belief is that spirits return to this world for 3 days to visit family. The timing of those 3 days is based on the lunar calendar, so the exact dates vary from year to year, but they usually fall in early August. The first day is the welcoming day. Families visit the tombs where their ancestors' remains are kept, and they escort the spirits home, where a family altar is set up with offerings of their favorite food and drinks. On the second day, family members pray to their ancestors at the family altar, often traveling from one home to another to pay respects to all their ancestors. The final day of Obin is when the family gathers to celebrate with a lavish dinner, after which they escort the ancestors back to the spirit realm, with the help of teams of Aisa dancers that parade through every town and village. It's an amazing festival and cultural tradition, but it's also considered to be the time in Okinawa every year when spirits of the dead are the most active. As luck would have it, our family moved into our new house on Okinawa in early August, during Obin. It was me, my wife, our dog Sparky, and my wife's 2 sons who were ages 8 and 12 at the time. Let's call the younger one Brian and his older brother Jack. The house had 3 bedrooms arranged side to side on a long hallway. Jack's room was at one end of the hallway, my wife and I had the room at the other end, and Brian's room was the one in the middle, between the other 2. On our second night in the new house, we told the kids it was time for them both to go to bed. Jack went off to brush his teeth with no fuss, took Sparky into his room with him, closed the door, and went to sleep. Brian refused though. We figured that he simply wasn't tired yet on account of the jet lag we were all experiencing after the recent flight from the USA to Japan. My wife and I told Brian he had to go to bed, even if he didn't feel tired, so he could get his body clock reset to the local time. He kept resisting though, becoming less and less silly and more agitated. Finally, he broke down and started crying, and at that point we knew something else was seriously wrong, because this was not normal behavior for him. We hugged Brian and got him to calm down, and we tried to get him to share whatever was bothering him. It took a little while for him to open up, but then he told us an amazing story. Brian said that during the previous night, our first night in the house, he couldn't sleep on account of the jet lag. In the middle of the night he heard a noise, and he looked up to see the door to his room slowly opening. A little boy roughly his age walked into the room, illuminated by the light filtering through the window blinds from the street lamp outside. The boy walked over to the corner, and he started looking at Brian's toys that were on top of his suitcase. After a moment, the little boy looked up at Brian, and then he simply disappeared. Brian told us through his tears that he was afraid to sleep in his room because the ghost boy might come back. My wife and I both thought it was possible that Brian had dreamed all of this. He wasn't the sort of kid who just made up stories of this sort. Whatever the case, he was legitimately terrified to sleep in his room. So, we told Brian he could come sleep with us in our room for the night, and he did. The door to our room was shut all night long, and we all slept relatively soundly. The next morning, I was up early to get ready for work. Jack was awake too, and he joined me in the kitchen while I was making breakfast. My wife and Brian were both still sleeping. Because Jack had gone to bed before Brian got upset the night before, he had no knowledge about Brian's story or the fact that he slept with us. Out of the blue, Jack said to me, "I'm really worried about Brian." I asked him why, and he said, "I think maybe he's upset about moving here." I woke up in the middle of the night and went to the bathroom, and I could hear Brian in his room just sobbing. He sounded so sad. The hairs stood up on the back of my neck. Brian spent the entire night with us in our room, sound asleep. So who did Jack hear crying in Brian's bedroom?